Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the state of procurement training in 2025. My name is Mark Hubbard, and I'm the Director for Learning and Development at Future Purchasing. I'm really fortunate to be joined by procurement, recruitment and training professionals today to discuss the implications of an increasingly complex business environment and advances in technology on the skills required to succeed in procurement and how we can equip teams with those skills. Before we get into the topic areas, let's just start with a quick round of introductions. Rachel, do you want to jump in?
Thanks ever so much, Mark. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Rachel Repper. I work for Amazon, and I work in a part of Amazon which is called Amazon Business, where we provide spend solutions for procurement customers. And my past background, I was a procurement director with DHL, and I was procurement director for NHS supply chain, looking after 3 billion of spend, and had the privilege of leading some of the programs through COVID. So we're delighted to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Great. Andrew.
Thank you, Mark, and also thank you for the invitation. Yes, I'm Andrew Daly. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Procurement and Supply Chain at Every Daily. We are specialist recruiters in the world of digital procurement and supply chain, and increasingly finding ourselves involved in conversations about the evolution of skills enabled by technology solutions for procurement and supply chain. So digital literacy, and now increasingly into conversations about AI fluency, which I'm sure we'll come to.
Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. And Mark.
Yeah, I'm the MD at Future Purchasing, Mark Webb, and our focus is really around transforming capabilities of organisations, both from the operating model level and also then at the individual through L&D. So that's our background.
Brilliant. A great range of skills and insights available here. So let's see what we can get out of them. So let's start with a positioning question, really. So learning and development has been around in procurement since we all got going. We've seen training being central to equipping teams with the basics of good procurement practices. And we've also seen a pathway where some procurement providers are saying that the technology can give insights without necessarily increasing people's understanding in the background. From your perspectives, what is the current state of training for procurement? Is it in the right areas, and does it deliver the outcomes that are required? Yeah, Andrew, shall we start with you, get a view from your side?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Well, I think I'm privileged enough to spend a lot of time speaking to people that I would consider to be leaders and fast followers in the world of digital and increasing AI adoption. And indeed, we did some research last year into what does the future of the digital procurement skill set look like, which actually... And what we found was that in these organisations that contributed, a lot of them were recognising the need for change from perhaps traditional types of procurement training into skills more focused on the use of solutions. But what was interesting was that everyone who took part knew they needed to change, but they weren't quite sure where they were heading with it all. And so they sort of took part to sort of find out what everyone else was up to so they could get a picture on that. And what we learned was that the situation was certainly evolving. There were certainly different levels of maturity across functions. But thoughts were definitely turned to what does the future look like, and what we found was areas like this technological from the tech perspective, but then much greater emphasis on human skills like critical thinking, strategic thinking, and relationship management. So the picture is really evolving. I think it depends where you are in your maturity as a procurement organisation, particularly with tech. But that said, I think the picture's really moved on since last October already in the 9 months, which we'll come to when we talk about AI. But yeah, a mixed picture, really, but definitely some evolution towards this new era.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. Rachel, you've got teams around you. How does it look from your angle?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start, I think, my response to the question that you originally posed by reflecting back to a conference where I chaired an opening panel this year, Procurement Strategies and Innovation, where the topic was, is AI a game changer in the procurement landscape? And we started that opening panel by posing a question to the audience. And we asked people to put their hands up if they used AI in their daily procurement work. And out of an audience of about 350 people, less than 10 put their hands up. So if I was going to answer that question, I'd answer by saying, based on that poll of procurement professionals in a room, the answer is a resounding no. We are not training people in the right areas.
Wow, that's a really powerful insight, I think, particularly given that swing. Mark, what does it look like from your side?
I think there's, in terms of the overall sort of state of training, there's more provision, there's more availability of technical and behavioural courses probably than ever. You can get them through different channels, digitally, remotely now, much more so than you could have done pre-COVID. So I think those things are great, and some people have tied them together very neatly into academies, underpinned with a competency framework, job descriptions relating to it, career pathway. So some people have done all of that. But we still find a lot of clients that haven't had training frequently or even at all, sometimes for new starters. So there's a lot of inconsistency in a lot of organizations. So you've got the leaders who are probably doing it very well, and then a lot of people who you would say there's a big opportunity to improve. And in terms of, I think the outcomes, that are people getting the outcomes, that's probably one of the biggest gaps, and linking procurement training to physical, or not physical, but tangible outcomes is definitely a gap, even if it's just getting line managers to pre-course speak to their attendees. What are they going to get from the course? What do they need to get? And then afterwards, how are we going to apply this learning? Those sort of things aren't being done at a practical level, I would say. So lots of opportunity for improvement.
So an interesting blend of some of the wrong areas being covered, or we're not accelerating into the right areas being covered, but also when people turn up, they're not necessarily prepared for the experience as well, even though there's lots more materials and content that's available in more digestible formats. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting place to get to. When we think about the people who are being trained, do you get the impression that we're hitting the right audience? As we see a lot of cohorts of trainees going past us, and I'm never sure that the design of the people who are attending the training is actually the right group of people listening to the right subject areas that are most relevant to them. I don't know if you've got any insights into that. Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think you've absolutely got to be gearing your training to the right cohorts of people. To go back to the AI topic, the biggest impact of training people in the use of generative AI is in those lower skilled set of workers. That's where you get a real 10x benefit, because they tend to be doing very administrative, functional, data-driven tasks. They're not necessarily negotiating face-to-face with suppliers or designing a category strategy. If you are a supplier relationship manager, or you're designing category strategies, that's where your training probably needs to be. And that's going into things like rapport building, relationship development. I absolutely am passionate about AI training because, we'll talk probably a little bit about this later, but, I've personally in my daily week had it transformed by using it. So I absolutely that tech side, but I'm a huge believer that human interactions, rapport building, relationship building is critical in procurement. You can't be a successful procurement professional unless you understand your customer need. And that's the customer need from a product perspective, the internal customer who needs to deliver metrics, and also then being able to work with suppliers in a really emotionally intelligent way. So, I think training has got to recognise that different roles within procurement have different training needs, and it needs to be calibrated for those different audiences.
That's really interesting, and that focus on stuff, we typically term it soft skills, although I think it's heavily undersells the importance. But that seems to be a critical area. Andrew, do you see that differential in people going past you?
I would certainly echo a lot of what Rachel said there. I think there is a challenge here, and it's the way the world has evolved. And I think that a lot of people still desire a lot of professional development, but we're all locked in the day-to-day, business as usual, merry-go-round.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people under pressure, this horrible phrase we hear so much, to do more with less. And so many people working from home, and that challenge of separating work and home life, and you're doing that. And so it's almost got lost, the dedication, the time, the commitment to training and or professional development. So people want to do it, but making time or committing to it. And like, say you're on a training course, but you've got various tabs open, you're distracted. And so there's a lot of barriers in the way for people to actually truly engage. I think for leaders, the challenge now is to create an environment where people feel they've got the time and the sort of culture to experiment and invest in that, and it not distract from the job they're doing. So I think there's a barrier to people actually moving forward. To your point about the right information and the right training for the right people, well, I mean, that should be something which leaders and talent and HR teams should be adept at delivering. But I think there's a cultural challenge a lot of organisations to actually commit the time to train. So that's a conversation I have with a lot of people. I'd love to do it, but these are the barriers I'm facing.
Excellent. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Mark, what do you think it looks like from our angle? What are we seeing in terms of training hitting the right populations?
Yeah, I think with the better organizations or the more evolved ones, definitely, learning management system is integral to all of this piece. And you've got records of where people are, what they're going to go on and what they're going to be developed in. But many organizations, I think a lot of that information is devolved at quite a low level, and it's left to local managers to, so there's no centralized view of it. And that's quite a common situation, I think. And then sometimes the budgets are devolved at that level also. So trying to create a program at a higher level is a bit of a challenge. So mixed bag, I would say. Some people very well organized, others it's hard to put your finger on what is the population that we need to train, and it needs to be really put a lot of effort into that. And I think through competency assessments, training needs analysis helps people get to that sort of what those profiles should look like. Yeah, that's a big piece of work.
It is. Good. Thank you for that. Let's move on into, and we're touching on this anyway, so let's explore it a little further, which is thinking about the different types of training that we're actually seeing and experiencing around them. And what we've got some audience participation coming up now. So I'm just going to launch a poll, and it's asking you which areas does procurement training focus on. Just select as many as you like out of the answers here, and you'll see live on the screen the sorts of responses that come out of that. So you should have a little poll in front of you now. Just click away in there. It does go down below category management training. That's the last one I can see, but if you just scroll down a bit further, there's a few more things as well. I think this sort of thing gets really interesting very quickly when we're looking at this. So just as the numbers go, spend analytics, getting a good response, negotiation training. This is something that still amazes me, is that something that's so fundamental for so many in procurement, that so few people get negotiation training. Amazing stuff. Systems training is always in there. That's good to see. Category management falling off the back, and there's just for our knowledge on the back of this one, AI application to procurement staggering in the back at 7%, and a number not really getting anything specific as well. So I guess it's the blend that we might be able to see. Right, panel, how does that look to you? Is there anything surprising in those sorts of numbers that you can see?
It's exactly what I'd expect. If I kind of go back to my poll of under 10, 350 people, the 7% is probably about bob on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's not surprising to me. I don't know about Andrew.
No, I'd agree, Rachel. I mean, we're trying to really operate at the forefront of this next generation of skills, and it's striking that so many great organisations, even the real leaders in the adoption of tech, have not matched their investment in the systems with their investment in the people. There is a real skills gap there. I think it actually can be relatively, I think it is solvable. I really do. I think a lot comes down to the mind, individuals, opportunity for personal development in this era. I think Gen AI can be your best friend, your best trainer, your coach, everything. And maybe we can dig into detail moving forward. But I think, we're still trained for the past whilst AI is writing the future. and we need a bit of a turbocharge to catch up, quite frankly.
Yeah, yeah. And again, just going back to your earlier point, Rachel, the behaviour skills, working with stakeholders, effective consultative selling, all of that stuff, which we know is so critical to actually making any form of change happening, is almost as bad as the AI.
Yeah.
So again, a huge area. Mark, anything surprising you out of that?
Not really. I mean, the building the case, we're going to talk about investment later on, but it's definitely a challenge always, I think, with teams to get the investment. And this sort of shows that the level of penetration of training. We used to ask a question in our global survey on this topic, when was the last time people were trained? We dropped it out. Maybe we should reinsert it, because it is a wake up, I think. And there's also something we've seen is this idea that certain systems, they're so intuitive that you don't need training. And I think that's a fallacy at the moment in some of the things that we've seen, where people are just pressing buttons, getting answers, but don't know why the answer's being driven out and can't explain it to people. And especially when you're working with stakeholders, to get recommended value levers in a category strategy or a supplier strategy without knowing why that's driving that, you're not going to be convincing to stakeholders. Coming back to that behavioural piece, and maybe it's a sort of guiding people to a little bit more working in silos, because I can get the answer without working closely with the team. So some of those things need to be reinforced, I think, very, very closely, that this is a way of helping you, but it also means that you need to understand the topic. You still need to understand it really well. And we've had CPOs telling us that they need both aspects. Yeah, we want the tool to be trained, but we also want something alongside it to explain it to people, so that they're building a more rounded approach than just pushing buttons.
I think there's a really important point here about the softer skills, though, because all the research we've done says that whilst you need those digital and AI skills to use the solutions, they're actually putting greater emphasis on the skills that can't be automated, that can't be replaced by AI. I've mentioned strategic and critical thinking. Rachel and Mark have both mentioned relationship management. Those skills are getting more important because of technology, not less. You could argue technology is augmenting some of the traditional harder skills of procurement, like negotiation and sourcing. But in terms of those human interactions, and particularly critical thinking, they're going off the scale in terms of importance, but are still being neglected.
Yeah, really good. That's really useful. Thank you. We've got a question from Clarice. Clarice, if you don't mind, I'm going to try and pick those up at the end. So if you capture it, I've written your name down at the head of the questions list. So we'll come to you first. Great, that's brilliant, team. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on. The really good insights into the areas that we might think about in training. Let's think about recruitment, just as a slightly different aside. And one of the questions we've been asking ourselves on the way through is, how have the profiles of people applying for jobs in procurement changed over the years? Are we seeing a different set of skills coming in there? And is there a different gap, or is there a gap between the skills that the hirers are expecting and the available skills that are coming in the marketplace? Andrew, I guess this is right in your area. How does that feel to you?
My short answer is not yet. I think if you look at a large chunk of the procurement profession, we're still operating the way we've always operated. There are visionary leaders that are thinking differently and sort of changing job specs and thinking about what the future looks like with agents and solutions, different tech solutions rather, and asking themselves, do they want different skill sets and do they want to change job profiles? But I think they're in the minority, and they're the visionaries, and they're still working it out in the same way they're working out the skills that we spoke about earlier. I think a large chunk of the profession is still locked in the day-to-day and goes to conferences and thinks, oh, that looks exciting, and then goes back and carries on as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting piece. Do you think that's I mean, this is a more general point again. Is that because people are just so eaten up by the day-to-day still? It's hard to stand back and say, I need a different skill set. How do I get there?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think also, procurement is still going through this evolution. We all hear the stories about where procurement wants to get into the value it delivers beyond just cost savings. But really, that's a small proportion of the procurement functions that are out there that are actually, you know, on that journey. Others still look on jealousy, thinking, yeah, that's what we'd like to do, but we're still mad in day-to-day sourcing and cost-saving activities as our top priorities.
That's really good. Rachel, how does that one feel for you? Are we seeing? Do you see the right skills coming in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to unpick. I mean, fundamentally, I believe that procurement is the function that drives competitive advantage in an organisation. You know, so I kind of have that philosophical viewpoint to start off with, and I say that as somebody who's been both a director of sales and a director of procurement. So critically, commercially, that's the function. The data tells us that people who are using Gen AI are 30% more productive, deliver more, you know. So that means you can turn one of your most commercially critical functions into 3xing the productivity. Now, that's not about necessarily reducing cost and headcount, but that's actually about becoming more effective. You know, we may come on to this point about sort of releasing the creativity and the strategic thinking and the time to do value add stuff. You know, that's really fundamental to get to those sort of big picture, needle moving activities that procurement professionals should be doing. I think my second reflection, and it's a real watch out, and I'm 55 this year, so you know, I'm hitting that nice ageism. You know, that's what's sort of kind of coming up now. Stanford University did a study which was published in December 2024, and 30% of under 30s are using Gen AI every day in their work, less than 10% of over 50s. Yeah. So, you know, if you're over 50, I think it becomes obligatory that you make sure you're not going to be sat in the 90%, because maybe it isn't going to be ageism that stops you being hired into a role that you want. Maybe what's going to stop you being hired is the fact that you've allowed yourself to fall behind the tech progress. Okay, so why would you hire somebody who is going to be 1/3 less productive than somebody who's become digitally fluent? So I think that's a super important point for people who are operating in the procurement landscape.
And that brings about, there's a really interesting piece there, which is, if I think into years gone past, you know, becoming 7 Habits of Highly Effective People et al, all that stuff. How do we get more out of ourselves, and how does AI drive that? Which is that interesting blend of AI skills and knowledge, personal effectiveness, and actually the soft skill areas. So there is actually a whole set there that we need to get behind and make sure people are very comfortable with across the age range of our teams. Yeah, really interesting.
And I think if I can just build on that, I think the point is that digital literacy, fluency is not going to be the be all and end all, but it's going to become the hurdle to hiring.
Yes. Yeah,
it's going to be it's going to be the screen point.
Yeah. Hygiene factors. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Mark, how's it look from your end?
I think from our side, the profile of people hasn't really greatly changed over the years, I wouldn't say, not noticeably. There is this need now to definitely embrace technology and start to experiment. Where you get the corporate sort of backing to do it and availability of tools is a critical piece in that. And not all organisations are allowing people to perhaps experiment in the way you can on your own equipment. But the kind of profiles haven't changed. But I think the big change for us, building on what Rachel said, is the splitting of roles. And we've seen much more of this over the last 10 years, I would say, of a focus in one sort of camp, if you like, of the category strategy, supplier strategy, stakeholder engagement role, that sort of strategic piece. And I've heard it, used various phrases, but then the go-to-market piece being separated out, maybe offshored, maybe being done by a separate team, but real focus around sourcing, negotiation and contracting. And I think that's probably the most fundamental change. But it makes you wonder, and the reason was you can't be great at all of these tasks. That was what people have said to us, why they've made those changes, and to get the focus on the strategic. And again, where do people want to recruit? It's in that strategic piece. It's around the critical thinking, the ability to join the dots of information, which still, no AI is going to solve everything at the moment. You still need somebody at the center of it, coordinating people, coordinating data, making things happen. That's the critical piece, I think, in terms of the profile. And as AI and agentic tools rather, and automation make the more operational tasks straightforward, I think it brings the focus right onto what is that strategic value add, and how do we get to be people who are more creative and problem solvers and forward thinkers. That's definitely going to be the trend in procurement, I would say.
It's an interesting piece. There was a comment about this earlier about how do we optimize creativity as a skill set in here. Which is one of the things I've always intrigues me in procurement. There's often no shortage of ideas, but there's a real difficulty in implementation. So how do we balance, in a training sense, how do we balance increasing creativity, more and better ideas with the other side of it, which is, and they must be implementable? Kind of an interesting place to get to. Do we think we get the balance right between coming up with the ideas and teaching people how to implement them?
Well,
you go, Rachel, after you.
So I was just going to say, at Amazon, we start with the customer first, but it's anchored in data. So I think before you can even get to what are your strategic thoughts, getting creative, it's got to be anchored in data. And I think that's where the digital fluency is really important as a start point.
Yeah.
And I think there's a thing here, Mark, where it's connecting that increased focus on creativity with an increased focus on execution and the ability to implement. And a lot of that is project management skills. As we often find that teams' ability to project manage an implementation piece, or even project managing strategy creation, they take too long over it. People take more than 6 months, we've seen, and we're sort of saying, well, what could you do within 12 weeks, and time limit yourselves? And a lot of people don't track this. A lot of leadership teams don't track how long it takes to do certain activities. And there's a lack of, I would say, efficiency measures in a lot of teams around this sort of aspect. So getting project management orientated, getting some KPIs in place to say, hey, it is important that we deliver in year some of this stuff. I think that's a great skill set to build alongside the AI side of things as well. And that's a mindset shift, I think, for some of the people in procurement, that actually efficiency of what we're doing is as important as our creativity.
And I mean, what that makes me reflect is that almost sounds like there's we've been talking a lot about core skills within procurement, but there's also for want of a better phrase, the management tier of skills about how to optimize teams, how to get the best out of them, make sure delivery is in place, that there's coaching and encouragement happening across a range of areas. Do you think the training that is out there is actually delivering that as well as it might?
I'll take that one. I think the short answer is outside of the elite that have got the resources. No, I don't. I think a lot of that falls on the individual.
Yeah.
To go out and do self-study, whether that be actual formal education, a postgrad, an MBA, whatever it may be, or project management qualification, or some day-to-day learning using the resources that are available to you online now, which of course are plentiful. I think a lot of it comes down to whether the individuals have got the appetite, the time, the resource to actually invest and develop those skills, because they've got those career ambitions to incorporate them into the skill set, because they feel that's what's going to move them up the career ladder, if you will.
Yeah, that's really that concept of it. If those are critical skills to get to the outputs Mark was talking about, but we see them as perhaps having to be self-learned at the moment, is that talking to a gap in leadership almost? Or do we need to think more about that middle tier as well? That may be a sort of an advanced set of skills that are necessary for particular groups of people.
I think it's a resource thing. I mean, Rachel's fortunate enough to work in a business like Amazon, whereby, I know we've talked about the training you get, Rachel, and you're the world's leading organisations. You guys aren't the norm. For a lot of people, that day-to-day grind we've talked about, and that lack of resources, that doing more with less, these are the barriers to that progress. So it's about somebody making that time to go on and develop themselves, which, you know, if you look at the people who've got the top leadership jobs, at some point you can see on their CV they've made that effort at some stage in their life where they've had the time and appetite to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've been very fortunate to work for two organisations that have invested quite heavily in training, and it's been it's invested even just allowing staff to have that time. When I was at DHL, there were a number of training programs. I think Mark, that's when we first met, and I think I can spot a couple of people from NHS supply chain who are on this call that would have gone through this process. But you know, we had a whole category management sheep dip of the whole procurement function, which is what you were involved in, which was phenomenally important. You know, that was for every single assistant buyer, senior buyer, and that was going through the supplier relationship management, category management, traditional kind of training. So, you know, that was a really well invested program. And then at Amazon, absolutely, there's a commitment around training. A lot of that is serve training, but there is a 1 hour every week for everybody in the function that I'm in, which is a dedicated training time. And those topics will vary, and sometimes people can't dial in because they've got other commitments, but they're all available online, and people will take the time to go through those trainings. I have a lot of very short trainings that I get pinged that I need to do, and they might be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. My AI training on a new tool that I'm using, that was I think it was a 10-minute training, you know. So I think an organisation being prepared to give staff a small amount of time, make that part of the culture, and to also make it available on different platforms so people can self-serve, super important.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
You bought your own fan club, Rachel?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
So have you bought your own fan club, Rachel? Is that what you're saying?
No, I just recognised a couple of names there.
I think you make a really good point about culture, though, a really important point about culture. And I think it comes down to these other things we've spoken about in the past, particularly Mark and I, about curiosity and a culture of experimentation. They all go hand in hand with creating people the space to learn, experiment, not fear getting things wrong first time round. You look at the sort of really visionary CPOs, you talk at the big events, and they talk about having created that culture, and their people really reflect that. So they attract great people, they keep great people as well. They're able to bring in emerging talent and have them learn. And so creating that environment, that culture that encourages that sort of behaviour, and Amazon's obviously one of them, is an organisation, is something a lot of organisations would do well to try and imitate.
But I think also that learning culture piece, you know, coming from the top, as you say, it needs full executive support and visible sort of, you know, they're bringing people in that they know. I've seen this happen quite a bit with CPOs. You know, they'll look for connection points and for driving the learning, and they role model really how we want to operate. And the values there, you know, these organizations, there's a massive correlation between, I would think, and I know from our research in category management particularly, but the way that the CPOs are looking at the value they're getting, and then their learning commitment as well, is really strong. And that's why, you know, most organizations, whenever we do internal surveys with the teams about what additional value, be it cost, risk, revenue related, operational performance related, they all think there's a massive amount that's available that they're not getting to. Now, some of that is about stakeholder engagement and building links, very strong links to stakeholders, but some of it is about the team's capability as well. And there's rarely do we see that link between the performance outcomes that people are wanting and saying, well, actually, I'm going to make an investment in this. But there's other things also, you know, culturally, that not just the leadership team, where organizations that we've worked with, you know, they'll do an internal blog, as Rachel says, the case study type of approach, where you bring in people in to give practical examples of what they've done with this piece of learning, reinforces it. And sometimes, you know, going external, getting some speakers from outside the organization that's a parallel, maybe not a competitor, but they can draw learnings from it. And even, you know, things like process champions, we've seen organize build that into their culture. So there's somebody who's, you know, who's our go-to person to speak about, whether it's running RFX, ERFX, auctions. We've seen all that sort of stuff over the years, but negotiation or even, you know, parts of strategy. How do we get business requirements from teams, and having somebody who really knows how to do that. And that's building that cohesive culture in the organization. Quite rare to find somebody pulling all of those levers, but it's definitely there. And it's really untapped potential that within your own team that you're not really communicating, connecting people together if you're not doing it. So it's a great opportunity to learn from each other, I think.
Really good. That's really good. Thank you, Mark. I mean, just a slight aside, you mentioned the work that we do on the global category management survey, and in there is actually a question on what is the quality of the procurement training that people are receiving. Is it worth just mentioning that on the way through?
Yeah, it was surprising actually. It's gone down, hasn't it? It's obviously not our training, but only 26% of respondents said that their training in that space, and that's classroom training, would they regard as excellent, which was really surprising. But then we also asked a question about, you know, what's the kind of quality of application of category management, and only 36% said it was excellent. So you know, there is a correlation between doing the training and then what are we getting as outcomes from this.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's just touching on a slightly different area. We talk about training programs as a very generic thing, as if they're all the same, but in our group experience, should a good training program have in it? Are there particular components that we see? I think that last conversation mentioned a couple of things in there, but are there things that you'd like to see in a high quality training program? And perhaps there's a commentary here about the change in consumption style for training materials. I mean, I think all of us now do YouTube training on a pretty regular basis for pretty much everything. So yeah, how does that consumption change as well? Any views on that?
Well, I have I sort of like receive a lot of video training, you know, with the captions, and you know, I've now figured out that unless I've got the captions as well, I don't kind of pay attention. So, so you know, so the video training I find really effective because I can stop, pause it, go back. Yeah. Or I've missed something, haven't quite understood it, I got distracted. Right, let's go again. So, completely agree on the video training. I'm a firm believer on getting peers to train their peers.
Yeah.
So it's really important for the credibility of the training being delivered that somebody feel they can deliver the outputs of it. And I think hearing from one of their peers and using real use cases is super important. So I think even if somebody's coming in an organization like yourselves and delivering training, to then have somebody sort of in that training who's talking through their use case and demonstrating how they've executed is really impactful for those receiving it, because it becomes so relatable then. So yeah, so I sort of firmly believe in those two things really. And also, actually, I guess third, you know, getting together has a lot of us were working remotely, or we're in global, or I'm working a pan-European team. So actually people coming back and having a shared experience of training, I think is really unifying from a team building perspective, and having people sharing anecdotes, stories, problems. And you'll sort of see people having side chats on topics because something has come up, and that has a cultural feeling good about being work, a sense of belonging that I think is really important nowadays.
That's really good. Yeah, we have one current client who talks a lot about that very particular aspect. Yeah, absolutely. Making people feel engaged and involved in the business and the sharing of discussions. And from a professional procurement observer, then watching two people in the room who are both doing exactly the same thing but have never met each other before is often a source of massive solutions and interest and then creativity as well. So that's always good to watch. Andrew, what sort of things have you seen in that space?
Well, I think Rachel makes two really great points there that I've seen myself. So that video element of it, so effectively on demand, that's particularly worked well for organisations where they're trying to develop digital literacy, particularly the use of specific tools. So, let's say you run a sourcing event, but you only run one every so often. You might sort of forget exactly how it works. You can drop back into the video and remind yourself, familiarise yourself with the process. I think that sort of on-demand learning is really the modern world we live in now. Yeah. But Rachel talks about our culture there at Amazon, which I think it is all the hallmarks of the very best organisations, about where you create that environment where people, quite frankly, feel left out if they're not on that development train. Yeah. So you get this sort of momentum where everyone's firing off each other. It's a lot like we used to have. I don't show my age here, but when I first started in recruitment, we worked in the office and we had this team and we all sparked off each other. We learned from each other. There was more experienced people, different ideas, and you had all that. And that's difficult to replicate when you've got an international team or you're all at home. But if you can somehow foster a culture whereby people feel that's how it's done here, that is so powerful. And those that don't sort of feel left behind, get left out, that's not where you want to be. So that removes the barriers to entry, removes some of the fear and resistance to change, and starts to get that positive momentum going. So they're all very desirable traits, and certainly the companies that we researched that were having real success in developing the skill sets, those were the avenues they were going down. Brilliant.
That's really good insight. I think that how do you make it part of the workplace thing is critical. It's still communication is still a human thing, isn't it? Which is good. Mark, are there any other areas that we should be thinking about in training programs?
I think it's the design piece that we do, Mark, which is trying to build in that sort of theory of 70-20-10. So a lot of people will be aware of it, but it's the idea that classroom training is only the 10% of where adult learning takes place. Really important, creates a baseline of understanding, so it creates commonality of usage rather than everybody going off and learning their own version of a particular competency. So it's really powerful, really useful, but it is the baseline really. Above it, the 20%, as we're saying, which is about interaction and coaching and learning from others. And that's all the great stuff that we will have experienced and people do in their careers, where you're getting a great mentor internally, somebody who's coaching you through certain things, and you're getting to observe things as well. And as we've talked about, sometimes it's great to have somebody sat in a negotiation with you, observing you, because often it is might feel brave to do, but really powerful because you get some direct feedback. And also you can observe other people doing those sort of activities as well, which is really interesting. But the 70% comes from the real life projects and the things that people get to do. And, at the start of my career, when I started in a procurement function in Mobil Oil, we definitely had a limited amount of formal training, I would say, and process stuff was not really standardized as much as it could have been in those days, in the early 90s. But we did get thrown in with lots of, I would say, high risk projects. You were given as a junior person, relatively junior, and you made a load of learnings from it and stuff that sticks with you. So coordinating that 70% is the challenge, and I think you can do more on the 20%, easier to control, but you're definitely dependent on the line managers really embracing this and recognizing that that's how learning works. And I don't know if it's really that well understood across teams, that the important piece for me is getting them to see that it is the operational, it's the day-to-day projects that you're given that expands your learning and understanding. That's really, really where you're going to make great leaps. And somebody who allows you as an organization to do that is really attractive.
That's a really interesting point these days, Mark, because you often learn more when things don't go well, and you were given high-risk projects as a relatively junior procurement professional. But now that entry point is not available anymore, is it? It's automated, or it's going to be done by an agent moving forward. So what's the entry point for a graduate procurement person now to learn the ropes, so to speak? So that's an interesting challenge we've got moving forward, as to how do you sort of give those fundamental skills that we've done, like POs and all that sort of thing, that aren't necessarily going to be available anymore.
Yeah, the PO stuff, I have to say, was completely boring, and I was really glad when I didn't have to do it anymore. And all pressing the button to release requisitions out of an ERP system was not a great use of time. But there were things that you definitely, I could see your point, you definitely will lose out some of those early low risk categories that you were allowed to run things on under somebody's tutelage. They're things that maybe, that sourcing event, which still taught you loads about how the market worked, how suppliers would react. It doesn't matter whether it's 100,000 a year spend or it's 10 million sometimes, the learnings and the behaviors are exactly the same.
Yeah, one of the other surprising bits in all of that stuff, doing the project work, is it makes you network, which again is going back to the soft skills area. Once again, finding out who actually holds the levers of power in accounts payable, that sort of stuff. That is still a surprisingly important for us to all know.
Can I go back to one of Mark's points? Sorry, because the audience who are on this webinar are obviously a self-selecting group who are interested. They are curious and they're wanting to learn, which is fabulous. And for those of them that haven't got investment from their organisations in training, I'd like to go back to Mark's point about getting people to give you feedback. I started off as a pharmaceutical rep working for Eli Lilly, and every week my manager was out in the car with me and would go into all of the doctor's appointments where I would be selling them a very well-known antidepressant that had come out at the time back in the 90s. And the whole point of that was we'd get into the car and I would get dynamic, immediate feedback. And that happened every week. Now, we are able to record calls that we do, whether it's with suppliers, customers. Clearly, you have to get permission for those calls to be recorded. But, get somebody to listen to it, to give feedback, or ask somebody to join you in a meeting. And I think that is something that everybody can do for free. You've just got to find somebody you trust, somebody who's got a skill set, and ask for that feedback. I do a bit of amateur dramatic acting, and I get my mother to come down and watch me sort of few performances out from dress rehearsal, because I know she will be brutal, and I never understand why people do not want to have critical feedback, because surely you want to be the best you can be. Yeah. And somebody who'll give you that clear, honest insight enables you to recalibrate. So I definitely recommend, for free, you can do that with your colleagues. It's a great step to take.
Well, what's it called in theatrical circles when directors, is it notes or something like that they're giving to the actors? Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting way of putting it. It's not feedback, it's notes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really good. So next, we've covered the elements of this, but I think just to try and bring it together, I'd just like to jump into our second poll, which is asking about the learning culture that people's organizations have. And so I'm just going to kick off another poll here. And again, same mechanism. There's a series of questions should pop up if we're really lucky. There it is. And again, multi-choice. So anything that you think applies in your organization, just click into those areas and see what you think. This whole the learning culture thing is really fascinating, isn't it, as a subject area?
I'm quite encouraged by the 23% who are saying there's easy access to a wide range of training,
Yeah, absolutely. And learning is not only for the privileged few. That's I must admit, I stuck that in from distant memories of how people were selected for training in the past. So it's good to see that that's dropping away. What else have we got? So easy access to a wide range of training is looking good. Learning goes beyond. See, this is an interesting one. Learning goes beyond the workplace. We're encouraged to try new learning and supported by coaching is so restricted. But as we know from the 70-20-10 sort of concept, that is so critical to making the application of learning and therefore the delivery of the outcomes that you are hoping for actually work in practice. So I find that fascinating. That's really good. So, team, does anything stand out in there as a something that's worth commenting on?
Well, I guess, whilst I'm encouraged that it's one of the It's second highest, isn't it? There's easy access. I mean,
Still
what that tells you
21%.
is 79% of people do not have easy access to training. So, and I think that's a pretty damning number.
Yeah, that's startling, isn't it? Really.
Mm.
Yeah, it's the negative that's the interesting piece there.
Yeah, and only 7% have got support from coaching.
Mm.
So about 70, 20, 10. It's that 10 is still very important, even though it's only 10% of the sort of equation.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical piece, and it's quite easy to fix. As Rachel's, example from those years ago is, those things are really powerful, but it's somehow getting it into the culture of the organisation that we are going to, line managers spend the time doing that, and it's a way that we reinforce things, and it's a critical part of it. I don't think it's particularly difficult to fix. But, again, it comes back to the leadership team taking the view that that's what they're expecting their line managers to do. And they're giving them the skills to give coaching skills to people as well, not just a straightforward, I would do it like this type of piece. It's the, how even sending people on a couple of days coaching training is a really powerful investment, because that then spreads throughout the organization. But, we've done that for a couple of clients where they've really benefited from it. So definitely recommend that.
And here's the thing, what brings people to my door when looking for a new job? There's a series of things, but the dominant thing throughout my entire lengthy career has been a lack of progression. When people feel they've reached a ceiling, they're not going anywhere, they can't see a path forward, or they're not getting support to get better at the job, that's when they either come to me or they're very receptive to my approaches.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. As a thought, isn't it, that this is still such a powerful hygiene factor for people that you have to feel appreciated, you have to see the ability to move, and training does form a part of that as a part of that sort of pathway. One of the things we've talked about before was lots of people talk about the need for upskilling and the skills shortages, which are talked about in all industries in every area now as people struggling with skill shortages. So we know there's a need to upskill, but the investment, it seems to be, as we know, every cycle of every economic cycle, when purse strings gets pulled, it's training that goes pretty much the first thing. Is there any? Have you got any insights as to why we keep seeing that as a cycle? Yeah, even when we know there are skill shortages. Just hope that we can poach from somewhere else.
Yeah, it's not something I experience in my workplace, and actually I've been fortunate that it hasn't. I've been fortunate I've worked for organisations that have always invested really well in training, as I've sort of mentioned earlier. I think it is about leaders of organisations themselves not understanding that continuous learning mindset and skills development is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely in that space that teams aren't being given. They're not always in the way. In the past, I would say there was a clear line between performance outcomes we wanted on our investment in learning, and I think that's sort of been broken a little bit. And there's more of a kind of thinking that we'll provide some edutainment for our team sometimes, and it's not seen as being a contributor, and having an ROI from it. And you can't link everything in that way, but having an overall view that I can't, if we're expected to uplift delivery in certain ways or to do more with less, as Andrew said, then we're going to need to to equip people in a different way. And I think that's an argument that isn't being made perhaps as powerfully as it could be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I think also when those budgets are taken, it's viewed as a temporary thing. It's a short-term thing. Where budgets are tight, we've got to do more with less, and we've got less time anyway. So let's focus on what we need to do now. It will come back, but it just seems to me that it rarely does. And I think that's been the case since I really noticed this around the credit crunch, which is going back quite a long time ago now. When there was a marked shift in the situation, and I think Rachel is in the minority that she's been in organisations where they've continued to press ahead, and there are others out there, of course. But I think for a lot of organisations, it's something we'd like to do, but we've got other priorities.
Good, like that one. Okay, we are heading in towards a close, so I think a really good place to go. We just ask you a quick question. what would a great, from our broad experience, what would a great next step be for an organisation embracing effective learning? Whether if they want to step their learning forward, what should they do? What would be a great recommendation?
I think start with a skills audit, particularly on digital. You know, where are we? If you don't measure something, how can you improve it? So start with a skills audit, and then, you know, consult with your people as to what they feel they need to do to be more effective in their job. And then, okay, whether you've got resources to invest in coaching, training, or not, there's still a way that you can encourage your people to seek out their own personal and professional development as well, with all the resources that are available to them now online, you know, through all the different things we've spoken about today. So creating that culture of curiosity, experimentation, and desire for professional improvement, so that not only you're delivering that at work, but you're also encouraging people to take it upon themselves to turbocharge that as well by you know, spending some of their spare time you know, seeking out what's available to them.
Excellent. Rachel?
I don't think I've got anything to add.
That was a pretty good
No,
answer.
it's quite comprehensive there, Andrew. I thought the things I would add into that: competency, absolutely agree. Performance outcomes, as we said, linking it to that, and also then the blended learning pathways for particular competencies, and the coaching skills for line managers. Those will be useful, as well as measuring. You know, coming back to not just setting ROI targets or something to connect to performance outcomes, but measuring learning in a bit more comprehensive way than just doing happy sheets after courses. What behavioural change are we seeing? What outcomes are we seeing changed? And do we, you know, measure things in a way that demonstrates that this has had a payback for us, which gets us more budget afterwards? I think those are the things I would add in.
Good. That's nice. That's an amazing set of inputs from you all. If you can, I'll just try and pick out a couple of questions that we've got. And Clarice, who's carefully had a hand up for so long now, if there's any chance you could just type your question in the question box, I'll pick it up then. Carla has asked, do formal qualifications like SIPs and IACCM still have role in procurement commercial L&D programs? So how important is SIPs now? Ooh.
Well, Andrew probably well placed to talk to this as somebody who handles the recruitment side.
So I'm not SIP's biggest fan, so just bear that in mind, my answer. Yes, I think it's got a place. I think a lot depends on the leader, whether they're an enthusiast, whether they're a believer in SIPs. But honestly, as a professional qualification in the modern era of digital, I think they've got a lot of work to do to raise their game, personally.
Yeah, I think there's a you know, I think my experience in that area is the difference between being able to pass an exam and actually being able to apply stuff is the one of the challenges that you see in some of these areas, without pointing fingers at anyone. And another question, which is, what are the biggest concerns regarding the value propositions and capability improvement pitches from global tech companies who are offering AI-enabled Catman? I think we've covered elements of that on the way through, which is often linked to the critical thinking that's still necessary, even when using such systems, and the soft skills areas. Yeah, Mark, Rachel or Mark, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just say I use some AI tools now in my work, and you know, the first time I used one of them, I saved 3 hours on a task. You know, that's fairly chunky, and a task that I would repeat a couple of times a week. And you know, I get an AI output, I read that output, I edit that output. You know, I'm not accepting what AI has brought. You know, AI is doing the donkey work for me. You know, I'm not having to put things into an Excel spreadsheet, do a pivot table, analyze multiple data sources. It's generating something for me, so I can then focus on the bit that is where I'm bringing my intellect, experience, creativity to it. So suddenly I've got 3 more hours to do that. Yeah, and that's really where I want to be. So I think my concern is only exists if people are blindly accepting the outputs. You know, it's a starter. That's what it is for you.
Exactly.
I think we do see people blindly accepting the outputs, particularly around category strategy content. Click the button, don't really give it any thought, don't expand. When there's opportunities to expand the thinking, point out the so what's. Point out, metricated, quantitative elements that they just put vague business requirements. And we still see it, and we saw it in PowerPoint. We see it in the electronic tools as well. So that kind of quality threshold piece definitely needs to be reinforced. That it's not just about getting the thing done. It's about making sure that your thinking is well structured and is captured within the tool and is augmented by what the tool can do as well. So yeah, definitely it's both. It's not either or at the moment, but people are turning off some of the training, but then people can't explain why its recommendations are coming through from an AI tool or a decision tree in some cases. But why is it that they are making those recommendations? It's absolutely unclear to the category manager. That's just not credible with a stakeholder. You've got to be able to explain it. You've got to be able to understand it.
With Gen AI, once you start to learn how to use it properly, the more you interrogate it, the more you start to understand the true power of the solution. It's scary what it can do, but people think about the prompt, but it's actually the interrogation of what it gives you and the constant, quite frankly, nagging of it until it gives you the outputs you want. That's when you start to really realize the true power in. And that when you treat it like a colleague rather than a tool, that's when you get the results that are important. But of course, critical thinking, as we already said, is a vital part of that.
There's a really good Stanford video on how to structure questions to get the best out of AI, which is well worth a look at. We'll maybe pass that around afterwards. We're at the end of the allocated time. Clarice, thank you for your comments in there. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to get to them. We'll come back to you afterwards. Superb set of discussions in there. Lots of insights about content of training, the areas that we need training in, the need for a learning culture, and the challenges that we can see within that. Some great discussion about where the skills gaps are, how AI is becoming one of the major skills gaps that we need to start to bridge, and interestingly, the power of business partnering, soft skills training as a critical feature, and how all that has to be built into not just a trained environment, but a coached and delivery environment as well. So lots of background in there. There will be a video of this available, which we'll get back to you with afterwards. Thank you, panel, for your brilliant insights in this. That was absolutely superb. And thank you, everyone, for attending. It was great to see you here, and we'll follow up with contacts for where the video is going to be once we sort that out afterwards. That's great. I think we're there.
Thank you.
Great to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks.